you. So I will move on to our next speaker who can tell us more about this topic for sure. Alexandre Borde, co-founder and CEO of Cibola Partners, who started his career as environmental economist at the World Bank before joining the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. In his 25 years of experience in development and environmental economics, natural resources management, and climate change mitigation, he focused on topics such as disaster risk reduction, regional and international negotiations, and climate and carbon finance. Today, we are happy to have him as our guest, giving us an insight into the logic of large multilateral environmental funds and the importance of additionality through successful projects he managed. Thank you, Alexandre, for joining us today. I will leave the stage to you.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you also to SmartBee for organizing this webinar. I will make a presentation focusing on some example, and I think I'll have to, as it was done earlier, to present it here on screen. There was already a couple of things that were said in the previous presentation. Hence, in some cases, I will be a bit quicker in what I will present. And for other pages, I will take more time to explain some of the important topics. And as you said, the title is From Talking to Action, How Additionality is Done. And I will also present a few examples of projects. Maybe I should just be a bit more specific about our activities at Cibola Partners to better understand what I'm presenting, what we are doing. We are basically, for the past 15 years, advising either private companies or governments, but funded by donors, about climate change, climate finance, carbon finance. We did a lot of carbon finance at the beginning, only carbon finance. And now we do also adaptation finance. So in one or two of the presentation at the end, there will be also something about adaptation finance and additionality. And these are just experience from the field about how it's implemented. Now, I'll be very quick with these first pages because it's just repeating what was done or what was explained earlier, but it's a very old concept about additionality. Actually, it comes back from the Rio Summit in 1992, where there was the first fund dedicated to global public goods. The idea was really to target global public goods and how, economically speaking, we fund global and we protect global public goods such as climate change, biodiversity protection, and desertification. And that led to the three so-called Rio Conventions, having the same name: UNFCCC, CBD for biodiversity, and UNCDF for UNLDC, land degradation for desertification. So all this theoretical aspect came at that stage, and the calculation was to look at the incremental costs and hence the additionality of each project from the baseline. And all these exercises is indeed still very present in any calculation. And that's true. That was true. That's still true at the project level, but it's becoming now. It's true also at the national level, and I will explain that later on. So this is here what we have already seen in previous presentation about the difference between the baseline, business as usual scenario, and a project that is targeting global public goods such as climate change and hence CO2 emissions, for instance, reduction, indeed, as it is shown here in that graph. But it can also be true for biodiversity protection, basically, investing in something that is not local but that is global, to the global benefit of the planet. So indeed, it matters because it's also a prerequisite for socially and economically efficient allocation. It's basically based on this approach, a framework where there is something that is for development, local, and something that has an impact that is beyond that local development growth approach or target, which is to have an impact for forestry conservation, sustainable management of resources, and so on. And when there is a negative impact, then the idea is to be able to offset. That's especially true with the carbon market with CO2 emissions and how to offset these emissions. And hence, this mechanism that is quite often used for the carbon market. So we focus here really on environment as a public good, and that's the key criteria. Historically, it started, as I mentioned, with the Rio Summit in 1992, and then this concept of additionality is still present in the different negotiations in the Kyoto Protocol, and that was explained by several of the previous speakers. For instance, the lady from Vera, Payal, she explained about what they are doing, and they are looking at the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, which is one of the flexibility mechanisms of the Kyoto Protocol from 97. So you see 5 years after 92, when the focus was, among others, on climate change. There was hence a sophistication from this additionality concept to the carbon market with the Clean Development Mechanism. And this is still in use with what Payal was explaining for the carbon project. If I continue to focus on the carbon and the climate change issues and how additionally is important, within the Kyoto Protocol, the approach was really to be focused on project, and it's still the case today. But what happened especially with the Paris Agreement, is that it went beyond the project aspect, but even at the national aspect, at the national level. Sorry. So this will be discussed actually in 10 days' time. It's part of the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, where at the country level, since the COP21, each country has to publish what is called a nationally determined contribution. So basically, all the countries, they have to reduce CO2 emission, and they have to explain what they can do on their own, that's the baseline, and what they cannot do if they do not receive support from the international community. And that's called in these documents, in the Paris Agreement, the unconditional needs. So basically the country saying, I can reach these targets without any support, the baseline, the business as usual. And then they have to differentiate in the needs at the country level to reach a certain amount of CO2 reduction, of development of renewable energy. They have to indicate that for additional install capacity in terms of renewable energy, they will be able to reach that target in 2030 under the condition that they receive extra funding from the international community. We at Cibola Partners, we supported during the past 12 months, basically, almost 15 countries in preparing the COP26 with their revised NDC, nationally determined contribution. And they have to update this document every 5 years. So they did it in 2015, prior to the COP21, prior to Paris. Now the COP26 was supposed to be last year, but we did it during the past 12 months. And we looked with all these different countries at their targets, their objective in terms of low carbon path towards 2030. We also, in some cases, with some countries, go beyond 2030, but for the NDCs, it's 2030. And we look at what they can do by themselves, and what they can do under the condition that they have this support. So it can be done if it's additional, basically. That's what it means. Here within this graph, it's a little bit more complex, because, and that's in this graph here about the Article 6 that is not yet stabilized. It will be discussed in 10 days, and hopefully, if we are lucky, there will be an agreement about this Article 6, because the Article 6 is about mitigation, is about the different instruments at the international level, about how to reach the targets for each country and globally, and not to be and to reach this 2 degrees, maximum 2 degrees Celsius temperature increase. You have the different instruments that are listed in the different articles, so I'm not sure you can see everything, but you have here under Article 6, I'll read for you. Article 6.2 is about cooperative approach. That's something that 2 countries can do, and if there is additionality, then there can be support from one country to another one bilaterally. Then you have the climate finance, the Article 6.8, so it's much more global. There is already the Green Climate Fund, that is the so-called governing body, the major fund with 20 billion USD already available. And for each project, I will show you that at the project level, the additionality criterion is a key one. But basically here it shows how this additionality is applied article, sub-article by sub-article within the Paris Agreement, and it's applied at the regulation mitigation policy level, but also for the carbon pricing with the different carbon markets, being the emission trading scheme or carbon credits with the project. And it can also be done with financial incentives like feed-in tariffs for renewable energy and so on. And in that case, the question is always, if the country can do it by itself, a developing country or an emerging country, then it's not additional. And if it cannot, if the countries cannot do it by itself, then there is this additionality criteria. Now, this is very important because this is the international regulation that is under discussion, that will be under discussion in 10 weeks' time in Glasgow, and it's a difficult discussion. Now, things can be done without waiting that. It was already the case prior to that, but it's indeed very important, and this additionality criteria is guiding basically the discussion, the negotiations for reaching the targets at the global level. So why is it challenging? Here, just to summarize what I was saying. It's simply because the comparison to an unobserved scenario is difficult. So when we supported these 15 countries, it was always difficult to know what is the baseline, what will be the baseline in the 20, 10, 20, 30 years time. We simply don't know. We had, for instance, to adjust all the data, all the numbers, because of the COVID crisis that had an impact on the economies of the different countries, and hence to adjust the baseline based on what the ministries of finance were telling us. So it's unobserved, and it's also difficult to anticipate what will be the future in a baseline business as usual scenario. The other difficulty is not to have all the informations in terms of for a given country, in terms of, for instance, the adaptation. What will be the adaptation in the future? What will be the needs? We don't know what will be the impact. If tomorrow there is a big hurricane hitting a country in the Caribbean islands, we don't know that yet. And hence there might be some needs for this country to get some support from the international community because the country cannot cope with that climatic extreme event. There are also a lot of factors influencing the behavior. We can simply see it now with the energy, I will use the word crisis, but at least tension on the markets and increase of the prices. And the last thing is that it's subjective because at the end you can just measure additionality ex post, so to say. And even there, you can always argue about the observation. So this is why it's so challenging, but still it's very important to have that framework to make sure that we use additionality in a good manner to have impact, because the idea really is to make sure that when we have this investment, we focus on what we need to focus, which is not economic growth. I mean, that's indeed important, but we go beyond just economic growth of or economic rate of returns or financial rate of returns if it's a project. We want to have positive impact on the people and on the planet. Now, I'll show you a few examples of projects. I spoke earlier about the support we gave to different countries. Here, I will give you a few examples of project also. Sometimes we deal with project indeed, and this is something that we did already a few years ago when we were really involved as an advisory company working with other here the Office National d'Électricité in Morocco, helping them to value their efforts to invest in wind power, and their choice to invest in wind power here in Tangier was because they will receive this additional funds. So basically the emission reduction will be, or their efforts to invest in renewable energy will be supported by the carbon market because it was additional. Otherwise they would have gone to invest to coal fired power plants. So they had this project of a wind farm, and from the beginning they did this additional assessment showing that the project was not the most attractive compared to coal, for instance, but if there is this internalization of the impact of a coal-fired power plant, it would make more sense to invest in wind, and hence to get a support to do so with this additional criteria and with this carbon market. So at the end, they decided to invest in this project. You have the picture on the right, and this project is generating or avoiding every year 334,000 of metric ton of CO2 emissions. And against this avoidance of CO2 emission, they receive some money and they sell the carbon credit. So here, this is a very good example of something that was really key in the choice of the power company to invest in wind instead of a thermal power plant. Another example, and this is something that we worked very recently, we had to, as you can imagine, to stop, but it's very interesting, and on purpose I wanted to show you this example. We sometimes we work in something like 80 different countries, so including Afghanistan. On the 15th of August, I was in a group with many people based in Kabul, and suddenly my phone was ringing because people were taking information from each other. We started to work on that project in July. This project is continuing because basically, you know the situation. I don't need to speak about that, but the United Nations decided to continue under certain conditions to support the population, and simply because here, and this is a Green Climate Fund project, so this is the new fund that is in place now for the past 10 years, the new instrument from the Paris Agreement with this 20 billion USD, is that it's extremely additional because first it's helping population that will have no help from anyone, not from the government, less even maybe from the new government, and hence there are already these populations suffering a lot from climate change. So it's I would say 100% additional here, and the target is to address impacts on the agriculture and on the resilience of the community through adaptive measures to provide access to water to the rural population. It's true for agriculture. It's true for even drinking water, for irrigation. So that's the target. And for that project, same, we are going through what is called here the paradigm shift. So basically, it's really to see why the project is additional. Indeed, for this case, you can imagine the demonstration is, I would say, qualitatively speaking, it's easy, but still we need it, and because we finished that project a few weeks ago, to come up with the demonstration that the Green Climate Fund has to consider this project as a priority because of the impacts it will provide to the population, and we are measuring this impact. Here, in that case, the country was requesting, or the population with the UN agencies were requesting some grants. So there is no trading like the carbon credits. It was pure grants in that case. But additionality was something important. Same here with this case, with also a different, also a difficult country where we have a lot of experience. I was mentioning that earlier with the Caribbean. I was thinking of Haiti. The same here, the GEF. So the GEF is the first fund back in '92. This is the fund from the Rio Summit. It was created in '92, and these are the first ones that started to ask for additionality in any project back in '92. They were the first ones. And this is still in the project. I started to work on such project in '96, so at the very beginning, and we had to do very long economic analysis with the incremental costs showing the additional benefits, the global environmental benefits, calculating these benefits, although the benefits as they are global are very different. They are not marketed. These are non-marketed global environmental benefits. But here in that project, same, we did all that work to justify that the GEF would finance through grants the population that is also very isolated here, already suffering from climate change. And it's a very good project. I took this picture myself, so I can tell you that this lady on the right here, she was wonderful. I remember the field visit and her explanation. She was very charismatic, and she was very happy about the project. So the impact of this project is extremely significant here, but it was precisely because it was coming from the international community to impact on the population that is suffering from climate change, in that case, and land degradation. Last case is also here a voluntary project with another standard. So on purpose, I'm using here, we spoke about Vera. This is very similar to Vera here. And it's something that is still ongoing very much on the market, like Vera. And here, again, we supported a few years ago this NGO called Entrepreneurs du Monde. They had, in fact, and this small project in Burkina Faso, for some reason, the logo is you cannot see the country, but it's in Burkina Faso. This NGO is a microfinance, so they are providing grants, small grants, to the women. And this is really, we are talking here about development. Small grants, and the women, they have to reimburse when they buy cook stoves, basically, or such kind of things. They have to reimburse the grant, but at the same time, because they are cooking with this cook stove that are much more efficient in terms of burning woods than what they used to have, like in the picture above. And the picture above, that's the traditional way they are doing cooking, and the below picture, it's a cook stove. This, for them, doesn't matter, for this woman. So they have no reason to pay more than what is needed for the cook stove. So really, the cook stove was very cheap for them. They were very happy because it was more healthy, no smoke, but at the same time, they were not paying the full price of the cook stove because the cook stoves enables to have energy efficiency. So the energy efficiency dimension of the cook stove is paid by the carbon market. It's paid by the additional aspect of it. It's paid by the fact that the NGO and the women they were working with are using this cook stove and saving woods and hence avoiding CO2 emissions. But they had to pay a little amount because a very cheap amount, because that was also a way for them to. There was a question of ownership. When they were buying, when they come to buy such cook stove, they were borrowing. I mean, it's a matter of a few euros, and it's much better for them. There is even they say, well, it's cooking faster. There is no smoke, and so on. So in the split between for simple material here a cook stove, it was for a small part paid by the woman and another part paid by this additionality carbon market. So it's at the project level here for this woman, something very similar from what I was talking in introduction about the countries where you have something conditional and something unconditional. So it's here the same logic, and this is why it's so important to have that approach. It's true for any kind of economic system where you have, in some cases, subsidies. So in a way here, with additionality, we are not subsidizing because in most of the cases, fossil fuels are subsidized. That's the problem. But we are internalizing a negative impact here, climate change, CO2 emissions, and we are making it positive to have a positive impact. So that's really from a negative impact to a positive impact. We have this logic of additionality, and that's why it's so key to be aware of that concept, to see how it works in the field, and to implement it. I think this is my last slide, my last page. And I'm happy to respond to any question. I think we have a few or more minutes if there are some questions. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. We have some questions. Before, I want to thank you, Alexandre, for your real hands-on examples, and especially the examples of your last two slides were really touching. We have a question from Hanya. What is the exact need of Article 6, and what is the relation to registries?
Well, I will start with the first question. What was the second part of the question? I didn't hear it. Sorry.
Don't worry. What is the exact need of Article 6, and what is the relation to registries?
Well, Article 6, there are many sub-articles, but Article 6 is the one who is regulating, and that's the whole carbon market, so to say, with market instrument not only, but we are starting from the scientists. The scientists are telling us we don't need to emit more than a certain level because otherwise we will lead to +3 point something degrees, +4. So it's the system of capping, the idea of capping the CO2 emissions, and based on the cap, then we'll be able either to, it's already a lot, but it's what we aim at, it's not to go beyond 2 degrees. So to reach these 2 degrees, we need to cap CO2 emission at the global level, at a certain level. And we don't need, and hence, if we're capping that, we need to have an accounting system at the global level. Now, all the countries, since really 2015, so basically the Paris Agreement, that's the change between the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol, is that with the Kyoto Protocol, only the developed countries had to limit CO2 emissions. With the Paris Agreement, all at different degrees, and it's not the same, but still all the countries, they commit to reduce CO2 emissions. So the idea is to add all this CO2 emission at the global level and to cap that. So the Article 6 is there to agree on the cap and on the mechanism between countries to have all this maximum amount of CO2 emissions. In another article, Article 13 of the Paris Agreement, it's about statistics. It's called monitoring, reporting, and verification systems. All the countries, they have to publish their data in terms of what are the CO2 emissions. It includes also the forest. Earlier on, someone spoke about Gabon. We supported Gabon on two things, actually. On and we are still discussions. My colleague are still discussion these days with the minister, almost every day. Very busy with the minister. Because Gabon is, as it was said, it's energy. We know it a little bit. They are exporting, so they're not responsible for that directly. They're not consuming that fossil fuel, but they are also sequestrating carbon. So what is important is to have the data about how much carbon is present in the forest, which is not easy. It's not easy to be able to do that. Michele spoke about that type of issues and how important it is to have the right tools to measure that. So each country is doing that, and is supposed to do that on a regular basis. We are doing that every month or every year, while some countries do that on a it's not in their statistics, basically, CO2 emissions. So they have to improve in order to have that yearly, but at least they do it every 5 years, like they're doing it now for the COP26. Based on this data, we can have an overall picture of what's happening. And the Article 6 from that data is able to create a market, basically, where we have this cap, and when we, for each CO2 emission, we convert the physical emission towards an asset. In the Article 6, it's not called a carbon credits, it's not called an allowances, it's a new acronym, it's called an International Transferred Mitigation Outcome. I hate this word, but it's called ITMO. And this is the asset. It's a 1 ton of CO2, but this is creating a legal ton of CO2 as an asset that you can trade between countries under a global regulation system. So this is the whole challenge, and we'll see if we find a consensus for Article 6, because today we failed to find a consensus on two things in Madrid in 2019 during the COP25. It was precisely on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and on the definition of climate finance. Exactly what we're talking about here. So hopefully we'll find an agreement on that. Hence, that was the first part of the question. First answer to the question. Hence, the importance to have a registry. We have several registries here and there. There is the registry within Europe with the EU ETS. Indeed, there are different registries, but at some point we need to connect all the registries in order to have a registry of this ITMO, of this Paris Agreement Article 6.
Is this already happening? Is this already happening?
Because we first have to find an agreement on the whole article. So it's not, there is no registry yet, but there will be a registry for sure related to this ITMOs, in order to have all the accounting system of the ITMOs for sure.
Okay, yeah, we'll see how this will evolve, and if you can find a consensus here. Let's cross our fingers. We have another question. It's a little bit more difficult to ask because it's quite long. Let me see. What is the risk of double claiming and lack of integrity if a country is counting a private project, like the voluntary market, within a nested national model, as well as with NDCA PA in case of bilateral agreements?
Well, this is a question that is important because it's just indeed the integrity of the whole market that is important. We're speaking about something that is intangible because we're just converting something that we are measuring for sure, but it's not as tangible as other commodities, carbon, and hence everything is done through, I would say, paper in the old world or blockchain in a new world. And we know that the blockchain is much more difficult to, I would say, the integrity of the blockchain is much higher than the integrity of paper, so to say. So hence, yes, there is always the risk to have this double counting, being on purpose or not. And sometimes it can be, not on purpose. Just people are forgetting that they are double counting things. It's true also for any accounting system in a company, just for finance, the same. So indeed, the fact that we have new tools that are much stronger in terms of integrity, like the blockchain, is important, and it's the key. It's indeed. So I don't know yet what at the international level will happen, but for sure, different stakeholders should consider this as the best technology in order to avoid what you are mentioning.
Okay, very interesting. There is also a second part for that question. It's an example. So, for example, a private project in Senegal financed by Swiss emitters in the voluntary market. Who is claiming Switzerland, Senegal, as well as the Swiss corporates? Okay, there is.
Who is what?
Yeah. So, who is claiming Switzerland, Senegal, and also a Swiss corporate, so private offsetting? So, this is an example for the question I was asking before. Can you, or do you know more about this example?
I don't know that project, but I understand that it's a project, maybe renewable energy or solar. I know they have a couple of solar PV projects or wind power projects in Senegal, and I can tell you about Senegal. I don't know about this project, but I tell you about Senegal for sure. If it's a power renewable energy project, and I will speak of also eventually if it's a forestry project, the owner will be the project developer. If it's the state-owned company, it's called Senelec in Senegal. It can be an IPP because they're developing IPPs in independent power producers, megawatt peak solar PV project. And then this project developer will be the owner of the carbon credits, and he will sell it to the Swiss investors against a revenue, and hence that will allow to have the most efficient emission reduction done here in Senegal against the fact that the buyer in Switzerland is probably offsetting something that he cannot avoid to emit. So that's the approach, and that's why it's additional, because otherwise Senelec would have invested in coal or gas-fired power plants. For sure, I know a bit situation of Senegal, and probably it's that example. It can also be a forestry project, so I have no detail, but that would be the logic. So, and at the end, indeed, there is a transaction between the two. The Swiss on one side and the Senegalese on the other, the project developer on the other side.
Thank you very much. Yes, it was just clarified that it was just an example and not specific. So I think your answer was clear. Thank you very much. Another question: are there agreements where all carbon credits, ITMOs, originating in a country need to be traded from that specific country?
Need to be traded? No. The country can do whatever they want, and actually, this is part of the complexity of the Article 6 is that there are different sub-articles. I was mentioning that. So it can be that some of the carbon credits can be traded by a private actor. So if the Senegalese company is an IPP, private, and if in 5 years' time he's generating this, he's avoiding CO2 emission, claiming carbon credits, he will be able to sell it the same way. But the country, Senegal, will have to make sure that it's also reaching its own objective. So even Senegal will have an objective. So hence, the government may say, no, don't sell it, because otherwise we won't be able to reach our own targets as a country. Mm-hmm. So the government may have the possibility to say so, but then the private player will say, well, I'm doing a lot of effort, I'm investing in solar PV, and the Swiss is proposing me against my ITMO, I don't know, 50 euro per ton. How much are you proposing me to the Senegalese government? And then there will be a negotiation between the two. But that will be the way to work in a regulated market. At the same time, there is still this bilateral negotiation that can take place. I'm, for instance, working a lot in Algeria and Tunisia, and with them and with the Union for the Mediterranean, we are advocating regional markets. So a regional markets around the Mediterranean Sea that is linked to the European market. So to help these countries to have a market that is more efficient between ourselves around the Union pour la Méditerranée, Mediterranean Sea, sorry. But that's also something that will be that will come after the agreement on the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. It will not come before. We will have to wait first for this agreement about the Article 6.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you. I think, yes, we have still some time left for another question. What makes a difference between a project with a strong additionality and a project with limited additionality?
I think it's really for an impact investor, that's the difference. So the capacity, and this is something that we are doing on a regular basis. This is why I wanted to show you these examples of see immediately what is the level of additionality is something key. So indeed, we are doing all the calculation, the analysis, the measurement, the assessment, but we can quite quickly see how it's never obvious because even though it may look obvious, the complexity of some project, I on purpose took a few countries that are very difficult to invest in. Doesn't mean that these are good examples of very additional countries. They're very additional for the international community, for the UN, but not for an impact investor, Afghanistan, for instance. But others, yes, we have this capacity to see what are all the different things, financial, environmental, and social benefits from any project, and how much it is additional if we consider the financial returns, which is something important. We are considering.
You want the triple bottom line, yes.
Exactly. So, but the two others is also something that that needs to be quickly assessed. But it's as for the financial analysis. You need to see immediately how risky it might be or not. So the risk of assessing the positive impact, how sure will we be in reaching these targets that we have in terms of strong impact is something important, and it's important to immediately look at that and to analyze that and to have the right decisions. And it's not because it seems obvious that it is obvious. So there is also the idea of de-risking for this part of any project, not just the de-risking the financing aspects.
And how can companies or investors, or what can they do in practice to make sure that there is additionality?
Well, they first,
like in terms of impact investing.
Yeah, they need to have, I believe, something that is not done very often, actually, I must say, is to be able to not limit itself to, for instance, in the value chain, so to say. We're looking at more these days. With the private sector, we're looking at with some industries, and what they more and more look at is to be able to go to the field in the different countries for any given project. I'll give you an example. That's Alexandre, we're working on that.
Yes.
If you look at the luxury industry and you want to make sure that there is an impact in the field, you need to be able to go beyond your pure suppliers, first or second circle. If you look at that, I was mentioning Haiti, and it reminds me that Haiti, one key products that's Haiti is selling for the luxury industry is vetiver for the perfumes. 80% of the vetiver production worldwide is coming from Haiti. You cannot imagine how much is damaging the environment in Haiti, vetiver. It's awful. I remember I was on these mountains, and you see the whole sea that's supposed to be blue and turquoise. It's spoiled by the earth because it's washing, because it's in fact it's coming from the yields from the roots of the vetiver. And if for the industries there needs to be an impact, it has to be up to the field, up to the up to the grassroots, up to the rural population, not stopping to the provider or whatsoever. And this is something that is not done enough. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not done at all. It's not done enough to be able to really look at the real impact, and it's true for CO2 emission and so on. And I'm saying that because we are always in these countries, difficult countries, and we see what's happening there. And it's always something that, doing ground truth, going in the field, to see this population completely isolated, speak with them, is something that enables you to realize what impact means in terms of, at the end, we need to convert it into something that is measurable, indeed, as an indicator. But you need to take the time to go in the field, to discuss with the people, to have a sense of what's needed, what is happening, and how you help them, and how you have a positive impact on their lives.
Exactly what you're doing. Thank you, Alexandre. And yes, there are many examples, especially in the fashion industry. We can look at cotton, we can look at leather, vetiver. So there are numerous examples for that. Thank you. I have to move to the next speaker, but I am sure you will stay for the networking session, so attendees can catch up with you there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Great.
With pleasure.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Great. So let's move on to our last speaker for today, Agnes Quack, founder and CEO of Mind the System, which is an advisory and training outfit on complex system challenges. She has more than 20 years of career in the Singapore Administrative Service, and her passion for transforming organizations through design gave her all the skills she needs to become an expert in her field and a true problem-solving guru. Agnes, I already had the pleasure speaking to you about